Welcome to another Knights in the Classroom video. I'm Sir Matthew, and Lady Andrea will be joining us shortly. This video documents our second experience at the Forge, specifically Fallen Willow Forge here in East Gwillimbury, Ontario, Canada. This time, for our second level experience, Lady Andrea has chosen to make a Japanese gardening tool called a hori hori, while I'm making a Viking throwing axe. Enjoy. The first day of this adventure began with just me at the forge under the skillful tutelage of blacksmith John Walker. We started by discussing the parameters of making my throwing axe, including measurements and edge geometry. The math is very specific, and I'm thankful I had John's expertise to guide me through the process. We started by cutting the piece of bar stock that will be used to create the beard and the cheeks of the axe. Then it was time to thin out the area that would wrap around the wood handle called the eye. This was done by marking out a specific area, then repeatedly heating the metal and hammering to spread out the material. The anvil is an amazing tool. Every aspect and angle in its design is meant for a different purpose. Here I am using the edge to help focus my hammer strikes in a specific area. The metal itself gives you visual cues. You know when to take it out of the forge when it's yellow or even white hot. This signifies that it is malleable. Once you remove it from the forge and start working on it, it begins to cool, going from yellow to orange and then red. Working on it when it's too cold can damage the material. Once we had thinned out the specific area, we realized we had more mass than we needed, so we eliminated some of the excess metal. It was after this process that we realized we had a problem. We developed a crack that John felt would only get worse and could jeopardize the safety of the axe itself. So we started all over again. But you learn from failure. Our second build, we used a smaller billet and were able to be more efficient with our time and energy. In no time, we were back on schedule and ready to use the coal forge to bend the metal and create the cheeks of the axe. While I continued to work on the cheeks, John started working on the bit, which is the piece of high-carbon steel which would be used for the cutting edge of the axe. Next, we prepared the eye, where we would eventually attach the handle. This meant creating a taper so the material could fit snug. It was a challenging process to ensure the integrity of the circular shape. And that's the end of day one, a long, 10-hour day in the forge. Day 2 saw Lady Andrea join John and I in the forge and start working on her Japanese garden tool called a hori hori. She started by hammering and thinning out her piece of bar stock to create the blade area of her tool. Much like my axe, this required repeatedly heating and hammering the metal. The word hori means to dig in Japanese, and hori hori is an onomatopoeia for a digging sound. It features a slightly curved blade that comes to a point as well as a serrated edge and a sharp edge. Some versions also include measurements up the center of the blade for digging and planting. It is a highly versatile tool that has been used for centuries in Japan. Meanwhile, I started day 2 by fine-tuning the piece of high-carbon steel called the bit that would eventually serve as the blade for my throwing axe. I can't tell you how many different hammers John has in his forge, but I can tell you there are many different types, most of which serve multiple purposes. Here you can see Lady Andrea use both sides of her hammer as she continues to draw out the metal. There are many different techniques that can be applied while working in the forge. Here, Andrea and John demonstrate some serious team hammering. So I'm now trying to connect my two pieces of metal, the main eyelet with, it's called cheeks for the actual throwing axe itself, and the blade, which we're also calling a bit. So I'm now going to continue to forge them together as close to one piece as I can. It'll never be one piece, but to strengthen the bond between the two of them, so it makes a very strong weapon. To ensure homogeneous forging of my bit and cheeks, I repeatedly heated and hammered the metal where the two pieces joined, brushed away forge scale, and occasionally applied flux. While I was doing that, John and Andrea used a fullering jig to define the area of the handle on her hori-hori. Then it was back to more hammering for Andrea. Once the cheeks and bit were forged, it was time to shape my axe. If you watched our first forging video, you would have seen evidence of us doing everything by hand. This time we had the opportunity to use some modern tools to make the job easier, and considering we were doing this in almost 40 degrees Celsius heat, we were thrilled to give it a try. Here I am using an angle grinder to shape the body of my axe. It threw sparks all over the place. Yeah, it was a bit scary at first, but eventually I got used to it. Here you have our progress at the end of day 2. Lady Andrea managed to forge her entire project, including the tang of the handle, while I was able to forge weld my cheeks and bit, as well as shape the entire project. Overall, a job well done, thanks to John's guidance. Day 3 began with continuing to grind the body of my axe, focusing on the area closest to the handle. Lady Andrea spent her entire day hand grinding in the plunge grind of the sharp edge of her gardening tool. Then it was time to create the handle for my throwing axe. We took wood from John's property that John split, and then I hacked it down into a more usable size using another of the axes John had previously forged. Then it was time to try John's human-powered lathe. This tool John built uses a foot pedal to spin the wood back and forth, while I use a chisel to reduce the size of the wood and create the circular shape required to fit the eye of the axe. It took considerable time to chisel the wood down to the right size, and to ensure accurate results, we used calipers to measure the diameter of the wood. I then used sandpaper to smooth out the handle, followed by John cutting the excess off both ends to finish my handle. And that would end day 3. Day 4 saw Lady Andrea fine-tune the jagged angles that made up the serrated edge of her gardening tool, followed by John helping her put a slight curve in the blade. Then it was time to quench. I also quenched my throwing axe, focusing on the high-carbon bit, trying to keep the body of the axe softer to absorb the impact when throwing. Following the quench, we waited for the metal to cool and then we both hand-sanded our projects. I put the finishing touches on my handle by applying linseed oil while John prepared Andrea's hory-hory for its handle application, followed by the final sharp edge being applied to my axe. Here you see Andrea's gardening tool with a collection of holes in the handle area known as the tang. These are to ensure as much contact between the handle scales and the epoxy. Attaching the handle is a time-consuming and crucial part of the build. Once the epoxy was set, the scales were clamped into place. Holes were drilled where the metal pins would be inserted to provide a very secure finished product. Followed by lots and lots and lots of sanding. And finally, a quick sharpen of the edge and some linseed oil for the handle. Then it was time for testing.
Hi everyone, I'm going to be using the hory-hory that I made at the forge. You'll see there's kind of like a beveled zone in the middle. That's perfect to use as a trowel. Great for digging out weeds. So all I have to do is go down like this, stick it in the ground, lever it up using science, and there's my weed. This side has a super sharp edge, which is perfect for cutting things. So I could cut some kale, just slicing it off for my salad later. And these teeth along here are for cutting really sharp, really hard things like roots that you might encounter in the ground, or just because you want to trim a plant.
Now it's time to throw this guy. Is that in the frame?
Yeah.
Go pick it up, try it again. I know, it's weird.
It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be.
No, it's not hard to do. It's
hard on
getting the right rotation, right? I mean, the last thing you want to do is throw it at an opponent and then have it bounce off them.
so they can throw it back at you.
Pretty much. So your release point needs to be sooner because it's hitting the ground now. Yeah.
I'll try it one more time.
Yeah, so you want to...
Third time lucky.
So where you're throwing it now, you need to release it out here,
Okay.
not so much further.
Okay.
It's a good throw, it just bounced off, so you're going to throw a little harder.
Okay.
Keep trying. You stay where you are and right.
All right. I'll try one.
Sure, I need some more handles. Well, it'll go in when it gets there.
Okay, I'm
So
done.
release point. What? I want you to do it until it sits.
Really?
I do. I mean, how often are we going to do this? So, throw it hard, okay, and release it up a little higher because you're releasing too late.
Okay. Higher.
That was a good shot. It stuck in the ground, but you know.
One more. I'm worried it's one.
Dear, the steel is fine. It's the wood that's already broken once. So whatever he did to this one, it did a better job. He did a better job. All right. I mean, again, it's rotation, so it's repetition to get it right. So the form's got to be right in such a way.
Close?
I don't know.
I'll try to step back.
I'll give you a second to reframe you then, because you might come out of frame. No, you're good. There you go. Well done. Good job. Perfect.
Woo!
So it's,
Woohoo!
it's an interesting science, right? It's not
That's
about...
why I stepped back, because you said it was about rotation.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the Olympic diving and how much distance they needed to be able to rotate. I'm like, distance, maybe I'm too close.
Yep.
That's how I figured it out.
Only Lady Andrea would think about divers when it comes to throwing an axe.
That's how I figured it out. I thought maybe I was too close.
Yep.